Welcome to Redefining Medicine, an intimate and personalized program that illustrates a different side of the practice of medicine. Our in-depth conversations will focus on mentors and motivators who are consistently reshaping, redefining, and rediscovering the field of medical health care. I would like to welcome nutritionist, researcher, and associate professor at Brown University, Dr. Mary Flynn, an expert in the impact of diet and nutrition on chronic disease.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Flynn. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate being here.
So why don't we go back and think about perhaps like what inspired you initially to go into nutrition?
Well, that's an interesting story. I started off as a plant science major. I wanted to be a landscape artist and work in greenhouses, and then I took a course in nutrition. I realized it's what I really loved. I love food. I think in the day I probably would have been a chef if it wasn't as big an option in the 70s. I went to the University of Rhode Island, and I took a course in nutrition, and that launched me on my love of it.
So you decided to pursue that in a big way.
Yes.
So now you're at the Miriam Hospital, right, at Brown University?
Correct.
So do you prefer the practice of nutrition or teaching?
Well, it's interesting. My true love is research. So research means that you design a protocol, you want to test some hypothesis, and you ask people to do specific things. So then what you see is a cause and effect. You tell them to do something for a period of time, you do measurements when they start, you do measurements at the end, and you and the patient can learn from that. The other thing I do is clinical care, which I try to translate my research into. So that would be, I see you once, you have something that's relevant to the clinics I'm in, and then, I see you once and I ask you to do something, do you do it, do you not, whatever. So that's not really as interesting. I do love teaching. I love teaching. I think it's really interesting to see people grow in the area, to see them really understand the concept of nutrition. Nutrition has changed pretty dramatically in the last 25 years that I've been teaching it. I've been teaching undergrad nutrition for 25 years, and I've been teaching in the Brown Medical School for about a little bit less than that. And what I can say specifically for the medical students is the interest in nutrition and what I call food is medicine, using food to improve your health, has grown enormously. There was a time in the late 90s where the medical students would literally put on their evaluations, why are we having classes in nutrition? We don't need to know this, as it is not on our boards. And vitamins were what they were interested in. So now that food is, it's really interesting to see them want to make these changes because they're eating better, I think. So they'll bring it to their patients.
Do you think that nutrition is adequately being taught today?
No, definitely not. There's not enough time. They have to cram a lot of information into a period of time. What we do at the Brown Medical School, which is the Warren Albert Medical School, is I teach some lectures that will be at lunchtime. Like I do different topics they're interested in. And then also I have a cooking program that shows them how to cook a plant-based olive oil diet that's based on, the recipes are based on the diet I put together. And then each week I give them a little information on olive oil, fruits and vegetables, where do we get my protein if you're not using animal protein. So it's a quick way to get them to change their diet and eat in a way that's healthy and inexpensive. It's much less expensive if you're not including animal products. So if you get people to eat that way part of the week, it's a cheaper way to eat. So it improves their diet, we're showing through the research. And then I'm hoping this translates to their patients.
So you're not teaching in the curriculum about the association between nutrition and chronic disease?
Unfortunately, no. Unfortunately,
What a
no.
shame.
No, I teach in the undergrad. I get a lot of pre-med students, and I teach a course called Diet and Chronic Diseases. And when I put it together in like 1999, 2000, it was to look at food and health, which in that time that was not mainstream. When we talk about nutrition, we typically talk about the nutrients, so protein, carbohydrate, fat, vitamins, minerals. And so if I said to you, eat a high protein diet or a high carbohydrate diet, how you translate that is very confusing.
It means different things to different people.
Yeah, it does.
Right.
So when you start to look at food, so you look at something like like a tomato. A tomato, we think it is a fruit or a vegetable, depending on how you want to classify it, and it has vitamins in it. So that's fine. That's like the old nutrition. Now what people look at is phytonutrients. So what components are in the tomato that will be related to health? So an interesting one is lycopene. So lycopene is the red color, and it's been known for a number of years, 20 plus years, that lycopene intake is related to lower rates of prostate cancer. Flash forward about 10 years ago, so it's been known for 10 years, it was known just lycopene in tomatoes. Then what was realized was the lycopene has to be in a tomato product that's processed, which means you bring it to a high heat, so it's canned, jarred. So anything in a jar or a can, so tomato paste, ketchup, canned tomatoes, tomato juice, those have the lycopene we absorb. The fresh tomato has lycopene in it, but we don't absorb it. So it's not in the form we absorb. So that's the stuff that I find interesting, is trying to get patients to realize that. Another thing that I think is really interesting is the whole family of carotenoids. So I think organizations like the Cancer Institutes have been very effective at getting people to realize dark produce is better. So that message has been out there. Even little kids know that message. What they don't tag to that message is that we need fat to absorb those carotenoids. So if you're eating your dark vegetables without fat, you don't get into your body what makes them cancer protective. And other studies show that if you cook vegetables into fat, any fat, you will increase the absorption of them. So the carotenoids come in with a particle that we make that absorbs, that brings fat into our body. So you need fat with your vegetables. So in the cancer organizations, to me, are still fat phobic. So they don't think fat is good for us. You have to make that distinction on what type of fats. Some are healthy, some are not healthy, but they just across the board say no fat.
What would be your recommendation?
Extra virgin olive oil. So extra virgin olive oil is a main focus of my research for about the past 20 years. Extra virgin olive oil is the juice of the olive. By definition, extra virgin olive oil is cold press and first press. So those are just marketing terms. Extra virgin olive oil, initially I became interested because low-fat diets were so popular for weight control, and I just didn't see them as working at all. Never supported low-fat diets from the very, very beginning. And so I knew that Mediterranean diets, that term, I knew that they were healthy. So then you say, what's a Mediterranean diet? Well, the traditional Mediterranean diet is olive oil and plant-based and red wine daily. But those are all plant foods. Those are all in there. And minimal animal products. In the United States, the definition has been stretched to include lean protein and fish and whatever. So when I first looked at olive oil, my interest was, if I give people calorie-controlled diets that include olive oil, are they better able to lose weight? My thinking was, if you give people fat at a meal, they're not hungry between the meals, so there's less snacking. Snacking became popular when low-fat diets became popular, and snacking means small amounts of food. And the human body is more able to trap calories when we have small amounts of food. So if you're eating all day long, that's a good way to gain weight. So little kids, old people, sick people, cancer people that need to gain weight. But the rest of us, 3 meals are the better way to do it. We are not as able to metabolize all those calories, so we have wasting of calories. It goes off as heat. We realize we eat a meal, we get a little warm, that's losing energy as heat. So initially, that's all I wanted to say was people will lose weight this way. And then what came back to me, my first very small study of 10 people, showed that what these women said to me was, I am not hungry and I'm losing weight. And I remember that was like in 1998, 99, and I thought, this is pretty interesting. So I started to try to do a little more research in that area. I carved out time at my work so I could do that. And I showed that people liked the diet and they were losing weight better. They were more likely to stick to it. They were happier people, actually, compared to lower fat diet people. So my original funding was looking at women who had breast cancer and looking at low-fat diets, which were very popular, this is in 2003, compared to my diet, which was higher in fat. And so the women ate both diets for 8 weeks, randomly assigned to the order, and then they could choose one of the diets for 6 months of follow-up. And what I found was when the women were on the olive oil diet, they really liked this diet. And if they started on that and then had to go to low fat, they were not happy. They didn't like the taste of the diet, they were too hungry. So from there, I've just done more things looking in that area. One of them was that early on with the woman with breast cancer, they said to me, this is so inexpensive to eat this way, buying olive oil instead of olive oil daily instead of meat every day, meat, poultry, and seafood. So I thought, well, that's interesting, because people think of olive oil as being expensive. But if you do price per tablespoon, it's really not. The standard bottle, which is 500 milliliters or 16.9 fluid ounces, that has 32 tablespoons. So if you do 32 tablespoons and what you're paying, it's really not that expensive. And it's much less expensive than meat. You might pay 40 cents a tablespoon. That would be like a really good olive oil, really expensive one. Most are 30 cents, 35 cents. And what's 30 cents worth of meat look like? Meat, poultry, seafood, it isn't there. So I did a program in food pantry clients. I looked at, could I teach people who were low income to cook this way, olive oil, vegetable, and a starch? And if I could, would they save money on groceries? So I did a study I'm on the board of the Rhode Island Community Food Bank, and I worked through our food pantries. And what I did was I went to food pantries, taught them how to cook this way for a 6-week program, asked them to eat this way, 3 dinners a week, that was it. And one of the things I looked at is food insecurity, which is someone's ability to buy, do you have money for food, basically, that's what it comes down to. And what I showed was, if people ate this way 3 days a week, they decreased their food insecurity and they lost weight. So it was interesting, it speaks to the literature that now is emerging, showing that including lean seafood, poultry, meat, actually that extra protein, you'll gain weight. So it's something that I'm trying to get that message out, and it's something that people don't think of because they think of poultry and seafood as almost like freebies, and they're not.
You touched on your work with the low-income population and trying to get them to eat healthier. So is this your work with McAuley House, or?
Oh, okay. So that's interesting. So no, but that came out of that.
Okay.
So the program that I did in food pantries, they called it Raising the Bar in Nutrition. The program I did there was written up in the Providence Journal. And then the woman, Reverend Mary Margaret Earl, who was working at McAuley House, she read it and she asked me to come in and help them cook this way. And so those chefs were very easy to pull into this way of eating. And we used to do it on Fridays. We did it for about, might have been 2 years. I used to go every Friday, and this Olive de Mundo, which is an olive oil store in Providence, they donated olive oil for the table, which was really nice of them. The meals were cooked with extra virgin olive oil that we got donated from California Olive Ranch, so it made it even less expensive for them. But the clients really liked it. They really liked the meals for the most part. A few grumbling, people don't always like when you take their meat away, but it was a pretty effective program.
And the ultimate goal of this was to combat diabetes and cardiovascular disease. And
yes.
So how did those findings come about?
So from the food pantry work that I did in the McAuley one, I applied to the Rhode Island Foundation for a grant that I tried to figure out how do I get physicians in the medical clinics at Rhode Island Hospital and Miriam Hospital. The Miriam Hospital is where I work. Get them to so they can make a nutrition consult to me, but they would make a nutrition consult to a cooking program. So the folks came in for the cooking program, and it was a 6-week program again. And so I have it taught by medical students and my undergrads. So it ends up the students learn how to give nutrition advice. They also learn how to cook this way for themselves, and it makes it more economical. It's not as expensive. And so we do it, different times of the day. And what we found was in the beginning, most low-income people, well, most people in general who have diabetes, it's not well-controlled. So well-controlled diabetes means that your fasting glucose is less than 100. And for most patients, you don't see that very often. And so if it's over 100, the problem is that extra blood glucose, so blood sugar and glucose, blood sugar is blood glucose, that extra glucose is potentially available to feed cancer cells. So if you have cancer, it could drive your cancer. If you have heart disease, it could lead to more heart disease because the glucose tags onto things. And then extra insulin, which is type 2 diabetes, you're making too much insulin, that can drive all diseases. So you want it to be as low as possible. So what we found was after 3 months of follow-up, these folks all lost weight again. And it was a small study. It was only 20. We were trying to figure out how to get this set up. They all lost weight. The fasting glucose went from, I'm doing this from memory, but it was around 200, like 195, and it went down close to 100. Of the 20 people in it, 18 of them ended up, no one had a glucose below 100 to start. At the end of it, 18 did. And it wasn't like we said to them, this is what you want to monitor. We were monitoring the glucose. And what we found was, and this I find repeatedly, which is interesting, is people become happier when they have access to food. You're teaching them to cook a way that's less expensive, easy, and healthy. And when you don't have access to food, it's very overwhelming. It's like an overwhelming thing. So now the Miriam Hospital Foundation is very generous, and they have now funded me to start a program in January, I guess we'll start. And that will be a cooking program for our patients who have any risk factor for chronic disease. And we're going to follow them 4 weeks on the cooking program, and then follow them for a year or so and look at a lot of things, like look at ER visits, look at hospital visits, look at different things about their labs. And we're going to try to see if we can change all those things, because all those things will make healthcare less expensive.
What's the age demographic?
It will, in our clinic, it can be young because it's a low-income clinic for the most part. So we do have some, 20-ish people, and then it goes. I'll do any age. In the cooking program I did for the food bank, we had people in their 80s, and I had a couple of 80-year-old men who had never cooked before in their 80s, and they loved it. They were like so excited that they could cook, and it was like fun for them. So, and our older women, they were learning to cook in a way that was different for them. So I've never had, interestingly, people agree to be in research. I'm asking them to do something different from me, and so I'm always grateful. But so you have, there's a bias of people who are willing to do that. But by and large, the students even say it, people become really happy when they learn how to cook and can cook themselves. So we just see that kind of change in people, which is really nice to see.
So you were speaking to a room full of providers, practitioners today. What is your topic?
Today I'll be talking about how to use different diets to control weight. Which is we
need a 2-hour program.
And we could have that.
Okay.
So I'll talk about, initially I'll describe what's a fad diet. So a fad diet means that you promise a fast weight loss, testimonials from people who are important, or names like South Beach, gives it a better name. They're selling a product, critical to the science community, and then they really don't improve someone's eating long term. By nature, they are, or by definition, they are something people follow and then stop, follow, then stop. And unfortunately, over the years, this is now what is really funneling into what people do, and they can be broken down into, I think, different categories. Like a lot of them are low carbohydrate. So the food groups that supply carbohydrate are vegetables, fruit, starch, which is a big one. That's all your grain products, and it's like the huge one on a food exchange sheet. And then dairy. People forget about dairy. So milk, yogurt, cheese. Those are all the carbohydrate sources. So if you restrict those, you're eating less. That's all you're doing is eating less. So it ends up that you're eating less food, and that's why you lose weight. But my concern is that you are moving more towards animal products. And there are no animal products that will improve our health. Health being the absence of chronic diseases. So there's nothing wrong with eating animal products. So I divide it into animal flesh, because it's easier to just say it's the whole thing. It's meat, poultry, seafood, whatever. And then dairy products. So if you look at them from a health standpoint, most people think of the saturated fat. So saturated fat is in fatty meat products and dairy products. But when you look at the literature on what leads to particularly heart disease, it's really red meat. It's not dairy products. There are enough studies now out of Europe showing that full-fat dairy is not related to heart disease. So you can have your full-fat milk, you can have your cheese. You don't have to go for the low-fat items, but it's red meat. And I think you can make the case that it's the protein or the amino acid composition of meat that leads to disease. So you have amino acids that can cause insulin to be secreted without carbohydrate there. You have amino acids that without enough of the B vitamins, they're not effectively converted through the steps, so you have more oxidation. There's a particular fat that's arachidonic acid. It's not saturated fat, it's an omega-6. That increases oxidation. I find when people eat more meat products, they're not eating as many plant products. So you can make this case, and then in America, people will cook the meat to death to try to get the fat out. So they char it, and that charring material are called heterocyclic amines, and they start and drive diseases. So it's red meat that really is the problem, I think. You can make that case, and it's not saturated fat.
So your recommendation for a typical patient that comes into an office, whether it's your office or a physician's office, your recommendation would be what? What kind of diet?
Okay, so over the years, I get more and more refined on this. And what I have found is if you try to get people to use at least 2 tablespoons a day of extra virgin olive oil and pair it with vegetables.
Is this in their cooking, or is this by
both,
spoon?
Both. Oh, so interesting.
Medicine,
Interesting. So a lot of people think you can't cook with olive oil, and that is wrong, okay? That is completely wrong. You can cook with olive oil. What people will point to is the smoke point of olive oil. First off, we don't cook at the smoke point, so that's sort of an irrelevant thing to use. But olive oil, extra virgin olive oil, actually has a higher smoke point than vegetable seed oils. But there was a study released in the spring where they looked at, it was out of Australia, and they looked at extra virgin olive oil, which is olive oil that has no defects and it's chemically correct, and then virgin olive oil, which we don't use in the United States, but it probably has most, if not all, of the health benefits, but essentially it's a little off. There are people that are trained to evaluate these. And then plain olive oil, which is refined olive oil with a little bit of extra virgin in it, but it's not, the studies show it really doesn't have health benefits. And then they used coconut oil, canola oil, grapeseed oil, something else. But anyway, they looked at all of them from the standpoint of cooking with them, what happens. And one of the things they looked at was the production of what are called polar compounds, P-O-L-A-R. And polar compounds in your body will act to increase oxidation. So excess oxidation drives all diseases. We can't stop oxidation because it's involved with breathing in oxygen. We have a little bit of oxidation, but oxidation is increased with polyunsaturated fats. So the main sources in the United States diet are vegetable seed oils and red meat, and we eat a lot of those as a nation. And then when you look at the cooking with these oils, canola oil was the worst. It made all these polar compounds, and I'm thinking, I have patients all the time say, well, I use extra virgin olive oil for cold things, but I cook with canola oil. And so now I'm telling them, whatever you do, don't cook with canola oil. It really, and it makes sense because canola oil was brought on the market when they realized olive oil was healthy. And there is no canola plant. It's made from the rapeseed plant. And canola oil, it's Canada oil. That's where it comes from, canola oil. And so it's high in monounsaturated fat. But the benefits in extra virgin olive oil, the health benefits, are not the fat content. It's these phenols that are in olive oil. There's a whole host of phenols depending on what olive you're talking about. But if you know the phenol content, like you look at literature, my best guess right now is around 200. It's milligrams per kilogram. That's how they're expressed. But around 200 milligrams per kilogram, which is like a high-end, good retail olive oil. That will lead to health benefits. And the more you have, probably the better. But that you see like different benefits from it. So daily use of olive oil will lower your blood pressure, makes your insulin work better. So it lowers your insulin and glucose. It decreases inflammation. It's the only thing we have that will raise HDL, which is really interesting. To my knowledge, there's not even a medicine that will raise HDL. So including extra virgin olive oil compared to other oils will raise your HDL, even if it doesn't raise it a lot. What studies have shown is it improves the function of the HDL particle. So HDL is related to better health, less rates of heart disease. Why? Well, no one really knows. And people have different theories on what happens. But if the particle is healthy, it can decrease oxidation, it can carry particles around, and olive oil, extra virgin olive oil, makes it a healthier particle, plus it raises it. So it has, and olive oil makes food taste better. It certainly makes vegetables taste better. So I try to get people to use 2 tablespoons a day, a cup of vegetables per tablespoon of olive oil. So I have found over the years, like particularly in my research, if I get people to do that, so if you're focusing on that, it's like if you have to get that in at lunch, you get your salad and your olive oil and whatever else you're eating. Then at dinner, you get your vegetables and your olive oil. It kind of crowds out other foods, and people aren't as hungry between meals. I find when people include olive oil at lunch and dinner, their desire for sweets goes way down, which is really helpful. So I'm going towards more simple and simple message as I go on in my career, but I find it's an easy way to get people to make that change, and it's not as overwhelming. You know, it's not like you have to change all these things, just change those.
So your message to these practitioners for them to relate to their patients is, so are you condoning Mediterranean diet? Are you condoning paleo diet? Are you just saying, you know, put olive oil on everything and anything, reduce your meat intake?
Reduce your meat, but I will talk to them about the Mediterranean diet. And what I'll make the distinction, what is interesting is, so the traditional Mediterranean diet, as I said earlier, is plant-based. So a definition changed about, I'm trying to think, it was like 2003-ish, and now they use the Med Diet Score. So the Med Diet Score is you look at someone's diet and you look at the monounsaturated fat content to the saturated fat content. You make a ratio. If it favors monounsaturated fat, that's thought to be a better score. And there's other things like, you know, nuts and seeds or whatever. So if you were in Greece or Southern Italy or Spain, you'd be picking up olive oil when you measure that. But in the United States, the major source of monounsaturated fat is red meat. You're also going to pick up canola oil, you're going to pick up refined olive oil, you're going to pick up, who knows what you're picking up. So the Med Diet Score doesn't hold up in the United States. And I have not seen a study in the United States that uses that score that has shown health benefits. I think it's because they're not including olive oil. So if you're not including olive oil, so that's what I'll make the distinction for them is, if you get patients to use olive oil, you will have these health benefits. A small study I did in men, it was 20 men. I looked at a lower fat diet and my diet, my plant-based olive oil diet, and they had to use 3 tablespoons of olive oil a day. And it was similar to my one in the breast cancer woman. They were on both diets. But in this study, the weight loss was the same on the 2 diets. But even though the weight loss was the same, when they were using olive oil, their insulin and glucose came down, and they improved this thing called HOMA. It measures your insulin, it measures your ability of insulin to decrease glucose. So it had these same benefits with the same amount of weight loss. So saying that you just add olive oil, you will have these other benefits that aren't unrelated to weight that add to the weight loss that you're seeing.
And in terms of the treatment of other chronic diseases, Is there a particular lifestyle diet? Does the olive oil come into play when it comes to an anti-inflammatory?
Yep. So olive oil is an anti-inflammatory agent. So inflammation is increased with polyunsaturated fats.
Okay.
So when I've just been asked to work in a Lyme clinic, and so I'm thinking Lyme disease clinic. So I'm thinking this would be interesting. We're going to look at fatigue, and I will almost guarantee when I interview these people, they're using vegetable seed oil, so they're using margarine, commercial salad dressings, mayonnaise. They might not be cooking with corn oil or safflower oil, but they're using all those other foods. I can almost predict it. And they're eating red meat, they're trying to eat lean red meat, and so they're eating a diet that's inflammatory. There are certain vegetables and fruit that contain salicylic acid. There's interesting ones like canned tomatoes, all your berries, grapes, zucchini does, which is kind of interesting because you think of zucchini as sort of like I would say like a vehicle to get olive oil into people. It sucks up so much olive oil. But there are some foods that contain salicylic acid, which is the active component in the aspirin. But then olive oil is an anti-inflammatory agent. So one of the things I find is that people who use olive oil tend to say, I just put it on the pan or whatever. I say to people, use a tablespoon, a measuring tablespoon, and make sure at your dinner you are getting at least one, if not two. You got to have at least 2 tablespoons a day. That's where you see the health benefits in the literature. I prefer 3. In my research, I asked for 3. So I like people to spread it out.
I just want you to clarify something.
Sure.
So 2 tablespoons a day, and you've seen the benefits for diabetes, for cardiovascular disease, to reduce inflammation in the body, for all of that.
Yep.
Wow.
It has. That's the thing.
Seems,
That's
so simple.
Well, the thing, and that's the thing. And so when I first became interested in olive oil, it was to get people to lose weight easier. That was like 1999 is when I started, 1998. It was around 2000, 2001 when you started to see these studies popping out saying, if you look at olive oil and test this, you see this. You look at olive oil and this, you test this. And it just, all these things come from it. And so that's why I get so excited about olive oil. I know my students sometimes think like, she's really into olive oil, but I have my patients too.
Right,
but
you need to buy stock of whatever company she's promoting.
Yeah, and so I do lecture on olive oil, and what I always say at the beginning is I won't get paid to talk about the health benefits of olive oil especially for a nonprofit. And I do a fair amount of lecturing because I just like people to realize if you just make this change, this is a really healthy change you can make.
Right.
And we have really good domestic olive oil in the United States, really good olive oil coming out of California, so it could help the United States.
I think you should just get on a plane and go to Italy and bring back as much olive oil as the airline will allow.
Yeah, I know. I do tend to put it in my bags. But we have, as I say, right now, one of the little issues is that the United States government doesn't well control imported olive oil. There's a lot of confusion in the what do you buy, how do you know, and so I know there are people working really hard to fix this. I work with a lot of domestic people, the California people. There's the California Olive Council. There's the American Olive Oil Producers, and I work with them because I want people to realize that we in the United States have really good olive oil, and because it's in the country, it's not as expensive to get it to us because you don't have tariffs. You don't have. I guess the tariffs are going to affect the olive oil that's being imported, but you're not paying. You don't have to pay as much for it because it's not as expensive to get it across the country, and so if you use that, I've used that in my literature and my research. I've also used, I work with some people in Australia. They make really good olive oil. Cobram Estates, I've worked with them. I'll work with anyone who wants me to look at the health benefits. I'm pretty much impartial to what I use as long as I can see health benefits. But as I say, the other thing besides the health benefits is it tastes good. It just makes everything taste better. So we eat for taste. That's the main reason we eat a food, is if we like the taste, we will eat it. We will continue to eat it. I could tell you, something is fabulous for you, and if you'd live 5 years longer if you ate this food, and if you don't like it, you're not going to stay with it. I mean, you just don't. You just say it isn't worth it. I mean, I wouldn't want to live 5 years. It wouldn't be worth it to eat this food. But olive oil isn't like that. I have not met a person who doesn't like olive oil, which I think is really interesting. I mean, it's one food that I can ask people to consume, and they're fine with it.
My stomach's starting to growl now. Okay, so question for you regarding avocado oil. What's your opinion on that?
To my knowledge, there are no health benefits, and that would make sense because I say the olive oil's benefits, the extra virgin olive oil benefits, are the phenols that are in the olive, and there are not phenols in avocado oil. So if it's high in monounsaturated fat, it would be better than vegetable seed oils because it doesn't have as much polyunsaturated fat. So you wouldn't have as much oxidation, but it does not have health benefits. Same thing with coconut oil. Those that just haven't seen the benefits in those oils. So olive oil has a long history. Olive oil was associated with good health for years. I mean, it's one of those foods and because the tree lives so long and it has all these other interesting properties with the wood and the leaves, and it's just one of these foods that, in mythology, and the Greeks and the Italians, it was part of their mythology. So thousands of years ago, people looked at it as an interesting food. It's used in all the sacraments, like in the Catholic Church. It just has like this long history that makes it a really interesting food.
So in teaching at Brown to whether it's the undergraduates or the medical school students, you have a whole semester worth of information. You've given us 20 minutes of what your semester looks like. So what are the other topics that you cover that you feel are so important? Because obviously, the most important message that you've relayed to us has been throw 2 tablespoons of tablespoons or teaspoons?
Tablespoons.
Okay.
Tablespoons.
Throw 2 tablespoons of olive oil on anything, and
every day.
And you'll lose weight. You'll reduce your
health risks for a lot of
right.
things. Yeah.
So what do you think are some of the other important areas that we should be focusing on?
Well, I think another area that I like to bring in, and I meant to pull this in earlier, was that so produce that's frozen or canned is grown to peak ripeness and then processed. So studies have shown that if you look at frozen and canned compared to retail fresh, not backyard, good farmers market fresh, but retail fresh. So you go to the market, you're going to buy broccoli fresh, broccoli frozen. The frozen one is higher in phytonutrients, and phytonutrients will improve our health. The vitamin and whatever minerals it would be, mostly vitamins, but those are equivalent, those are the same, but the phytonutrients are higher. So I promote the use of more frozen produce cooked into olive oil. So it has more health benefits, but the other thing I find is from the low-income population standpoint, and actually anyone, you can always buy it on sale. It's always on sale. So you buy it today and you use it a month from now, and it's, you're saving money. The other thing is it's all ready to use. You come home from work, you're a little bit tired. It's like, oh, do I cut up that head of broccoli or cauliflower, or do I just take what's in the freezer? Taking in the freezer is easier, so it increases consumption, I find. So that's, I think, is an important point. Another point is, which I think people are more aware of now, is calcium intake is not related to osteoporosis, bone disease, either treatment or prevention. So the time in your life when calcium intake is important is pre-puberty. So when someone's going through this, there's this longitudinal study that looked at kids from like the age of 7 or 8 through their teen years. And we used to say, 15 years ago, I'd say, we used to say you still absorb sufficient calcium in your teen years, but now they realize it's really pre-puberty. So if you have enough dairy product pre-puberty, you make your bones as strong as they're going to be. So then going forward, what can you do? Well, meat consumption without sufficient plant consumption means more loss of calcium through the urine, salt in the diet, more calcium through the urine. Americans eat a lot of meat, low vegetables, high sodium intake. So we're losing more calcium, I think it is the problem. The other thing we don't do is we don't put as much pressure on our bones. So you think of any class of European women. They're constantly on a bus or a train, and they're carrying their groceries, and they're reaching up, and they're always using something above the head or pulling on their spine. We don't do that. We have grocery carts. Houses are designed, which is pretty funny when you think about it. The kitchen tends to be pretty close to the garage, so you're even bringing your produce, your bags in very, very short distance. So I try to get people even just to carry things like briefcases, to carry things to put more weight on your bone. So they think that's an important point. Besides that, I'm trying to think, because when I teach basic nutrition, I have to go through all the nutrients: protein, carbohydrate, lipids, water, vitamins and minerals. Then I do sports nutrition, which is an interesting thing. They like that. Weight management. I touch on chronic diseases at the end, but I teach a course called Nutrition for Fitness and Physical Activity. And one of the things that comes out there very early is that the students, I have them keep track of their diet for 3 days and analyze it. And to a person, they say, I can't believe how much protein I'm eating. And people overeat protein in the United States. So our need for protein is actually quite small. You use ideal body weight. The term is ideal body weight nutrition, but it's really a bad term, because for women, what it's doing is getting non-fat weight. So you look at, for a woman for 5 feet, you start with 100 pounds, and every inch after that is 5 pounds. So if you're 5'2", 110 pounds is your ideal body weight. But it's really not. That's what I say. The wording is really bad. I try not to use it with patients. No, I try not to use it with patients. But then you take that 110 pounds divided by 2.2, and that gives you kilograms times 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram body weight. That 5'2" woman only needs 40 grams of protein in a day, which you can easily do with plant products. So a vegan, someone who eats no animal products, gets enough protein in a day. So when you start to add animal products, whether it's milk, and dairy products and eggs, and now you're adding maybe poultry, seafood, and meat at dinner, or maybe at lunch and dinner, the more animal products you add, the higher the weight goes, and the worse the health is. Always, always, always. So the less animal products someone can consume, the healthier they are. So I try to get people to start with a plant-based diet, and then if you want to add poultry, seafood, and meat, that's fine, but don't add them because you think they're healthy. They're not going to improve your health, and they're going to raise your body weight. So I have people think of them more as condiments. It's kind of a joke, like I say, meat on Mondays instead of meatless Mondays, meat on Mondays, one day of the week. But if you even do 3 dinners a week that are plant-based, olive oil and starch, starch vegetables and olive oil, if you even do 3 dinners a week, that's where I've shown people will lose weight. So it's not a big change that people have to make. And I find that people say to me, I feel better, I sleep better, I have more energy, people say. And I think it's because people are restricting carbohydrate at breakfast and lunch. And so if you restrict carbohydrate, by the time you get to 4 in the afternoon, your blood glucose is dropping and you're tired. That's the impact of it. You'll just be tired. And it's just because if you add a little carbohydrate at breakfast and lunch, you won't hit that slump and you won't be as likely to snack.
So now there's all these new technologies that are measuring, blood tests that are measuring food sensitivities and intolerances and your genetic predisposition to get one chronic disease or another. Do you implement any of this into your practice?
No, I don't.
And what are your thoughts on?
I don't know enough about it, to be honest with you. I know we definitely inherit diseases. We inherit things like, there's a big area now, I think, is carbohydrate intolerance, meaning that people are not allergic to carbohydrates, so that food. So they're not allergic to wheat protein per se. Allergies deal with proteins. So intolerances are you don't, either digest or absorb or metabolize or something. And so you have carbohydrate intolerances, meaning that when you eat certain carbohydrate foods, they're more difficult for you. And fructose tends to be one that's hard. So there's a lot of fructose in the food system because it's a cheap way to sweeten food. So it's in things like yogurts, it's in barbecue sauce and salad dressings. And so people may think, it was that piece of bread I had, and really it was the salad dressing they put in a salad. So you have to be a little more detective-ish to figure out what's your problem. I like people to eat what I call close to the earth. Like it has a lot of names now. I've been calling it close to the earth for 30 years. But it's basically, you have these foods that you just, that you can identify: vegetables, fruit, olive oil, rice, pasta, potatoes, quinoa, whatever you want to have, barley. You can identify those. And then, occasionally you rely on boxed foods, that's fine. But if your primary diet is made with foods that you can easily identify coming from the earth, they're just single units, you're going to be healthier. And it's just easier to eat that way. It just makes it more, it's healthier, but it also makes people, I think, feel better. We've just gotten away from that. And I think processed food is where people run into trouble. You just don't know what's in that processed food. You don't know what they're putting in it.
Well, I think we'll end it at that. Thank you so much, Dr. Flynn, for your time, and we hope to have you on the program again.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it.